Good morning, my friends. That's right, it is morning for once, not afternoon while I'm recording. Good morning, good morning. Hope you're all doing very well today. This is the Grimflayer as always, and we are playing another modern BGX deck for you, but this is definitely one with a twist. This is Field of the Jund, and if the name didn't make it obvious enough, the idea here is that we are leveraging a Field of the Dead package for an extreme degree of late-game inevitability, turning land drops into gold, basically rendering flood, the concept of flooding, obsolete, and we are shoving that into a deck that is otherwise mostly a normal Jund package that has been tweaked to maximize the potentiality of the Field of the Dead package. So this is a donation league for a wonderful supporter, Alan Lambert, total bro, awesome supporter of the Veil tier, and this is his latest project, and he's brought us some really cool donation league lists in the past. Most recently it was Earl Gary. You know, he's always got something that's feels really timely, feels like it's well positioned at any given moment in the meta, and is a very interesting call, and in this I think is no exception. So let's talk a little bit about the ins and outs of the list before we get into our gameplay. Alright, so a lot of what you see, my friends, is normal Jund fare, so we're going to talk about what's different. Of course, Field of the Dead is the most important thing that's different. We have 2 copies of that, and the magic number is 7, so we have to get to 7 lands. The 7th land can be Field itself as it comes down, or it can be something else. Either way, that 7th land drop is when you start making zombies, so Field of the Dead times 2, Hour of Promise times 4. So Hour of Promise is technically card advantage. It's a 1 mana, put 2 permanents onto the battlefield. Now they're lands, so it's not that impressive as a 5 mana 2-for-1 that only gets lands. But again, with Field of the Dead, that's definitely really nice. And in order to accommodate both Field of the Dead's clause of all 7 lands needing to have different names, and in order to make Hour of Promise more impressive than just kind of a slow way to get Field online, we actually have a really interesting utility land package here. So we have 1 each of Nurturing Peatland, which is a Jund staple, but Field of Ruin, Bojuka Bog, and Sheltered Thicket, which are not. Thicket was my suggestion. We had a Westvale Abbey here with Alan's initial draft, and the land base in general was a little bit different. I had a hand in tweaking the land base here, but I was a little bit worried about color production and consistency, so Sheltered Thicket is a nod to that. Wrenn and Six is a very, very important card to cast on curve in this deck with a lot of progressions. Sheltered Thicket can help us do that, but of course it is something that's good utility because it cycles. It also plays well with Wrenn and Six in that cycling role. On the subject of the land base, before I forget, we actually have 6 basic lands, and they all have different names because snow-covered lands count differently than regular lands for the purpose of Field of the Dead. Hence the 6 basics, only 3 shock lands, and 9 fetch lands to make it all viable. So that's kind of the Field of the Dead package, and again, lots of normal Jund fare around it. We can still go discard into Goyf and race. We still have a lot of disruption, but the late game is what's very different here. So the concept is that on BGX, we don't have card selection, right? So when the game goes long, if you're in a BGX mirror match, if both players are of relatively equal skill and the game is relatively even, it's literally just who top decks better. If you are against a blue-based interactive fair deck, well, the blue decks have card selection, so we can be on the wrong side of variance. We have no way to mitigate flood, is the major issue. And again, BGX decks do play some utility lands to help accommodate that in general, but here we're taking it to the real next level of the Field of the Dead package. So with all of that in mind, at the top end of Jund lists, you tend to see threats like Seasoned Pyromancer and especially Bloodbraid Elf. Tireless Tracker, though, is Jund playable. If those cards didn't exist, we'd probably be very interested in playing Tracker because it is a great snowbally threat and especially synergizes amazingly well with Wrenn and Six. Now you'll note that we do have a full 4 copies of Wrenn and Six, which is 1 more than is usual for Jund, but we need to hit that 5th mana for Hour of Promise very consistently. We need to make 7 land drops every game, basically, if it's going long in order to make Field of the Dead good. And Wrenn and Six, of course, buying back the cycling lands, the canopy lands, Field of Ruin, Looping can be really, really oppressive in some matchups. So, with all of that in mind, this is a deck designed to leverage Wrenn and Six to its maximum capacity, and therefore I really like Alan's decision to reach for Tireless Tracker as a top-end threat here. It's just a 2-of, it's still kind of a clunky card in some ways, but the synergies here are very, very strong. The final card in the main deck that is not usual is, of course, Gilded Goose. Gilded Goose is a card that I was a little bit surprised to see, but the more I thought about it, the more I thought, you know what, this is actually a really good fit. This can help us, turn 3 Tracker into Fetchland, which is definitely a line that I think will go overlooked by some if you're just glancing at the list first, but if you're playing any kind of a mid-rangey style game, especially even against control, if you can resolve that under permission, that's really, really strong. Also, of course, you can cast Hour of Promise ahead of curve. It's another mana fixer. It's another value generator. As the game goes along, we definitely need to generate value as much as possible. That's why we play Planeswalkers, that's why we play cards like Scavenging Ooze, and that's why we traditionally do not play any Mana Dorks in BGX. Like, think of a normal Jund or a Rock list. Turn 2 Liliana the Veil seems really good, so why don't we play any kind of a Mana Dork to facilitate that? Well, it's because they're very bad top decks and they offer no recursive value generation or attrition in the long game. But Gilded Goose is an exception, so it's kind of a worse Mana Dork in many ways than the traditional ones, just at being a pure Mana Dork, but repeatedly making food tokens, repeatedly gaining life, and also, of course, again, helping to fix our mana. That's why Goose is the mid-range Mana Dork if there ever was one. Of course, besides the dearly departed Deathrite Shaman, right? Not much to really remark upon with the sideboard, my friends, besides one thing. So triple Boil. The initial sideboard Alan submitted actually had triple Veil of Summer as well, but as you see, we're down to 2. Otherwise, he was on all of the stuff you see here: 2 Spellbomb, 3 Brutality, 2 Plague Man, and as I say, the 3rd Veil of Summer was here as well, so he is really out to get the blue decks. I think we would be seriously favored against blue decks with this list. Between the normal, good things that Jund has going for it, and the power of Tracker and Hour of Promise and Field of the Dead and the 4th Wrenn and Six and all of that stuff against blue decks. On top of that, we have 3 Boils, 2 formerly 3 Veil of Summer, and then whatever mix of Brutality and Spellbomb we want against the specific blue deck that we're against. But you know what I said? I was like, look, I get what we're doing here, but I honestly kind of think we're favored against blue already. I think if you wanted to make a little bit more room in the sideboard, we could cut either a Boil or a Veil. So Alan said, sure, let's cut a Veil. What do you want to play instead of it? Now, these Stone Rains are the things I haven't talked about yet. Alan initially had 2 copies of Fulminator Mage here in this spot, and I said, well, why don't we play a 3rd big mana hate card? That's a matchup I'm a little bit more worried about with this list. We have a little bit less early disruption, our closing power is less impressive, and the Field of the Dead plan might not be sufficient to overcome the big payoffs of big mana. So I was like, let's play a 3rd Fulminator Mage, right? And then I said, well, Veil of Summer, we still gotta beat that. Honestly, a big attraction to Jund these days is you can play Pillage. Pillage gets around Veil of Summer out of the opposing big mana decks. But then I had a further revision and I said, well, we only have, I think it's 14 red sources here. So Pillage, we want 18 to cast Pillage. That's a pretty far cry. And yeah, Wrenn and Six can help. It's hard to factor that in mathematically, but still, maybe Stone Rain is the safest call. So that's why you see Stone Rain. Honestly, if you have a mana base that cannot easily accommodate Pillage, don't be afraid to register Stone Rain. Pillage's modal, modal mode, for lack of a better way to say it right now, the fact that it can be a shatter, is cool, it's cute, but the only matchup I really miss Pillage against is Eldrazi-Tron. Having the ability to either shatter or Stone Rain against E-Tron is amazing. Other than that, Stone Rain is 99% as good as the Pillage would be in basically any other matchup. So there you go, guys. That is Field of the Jund, delivered to us by Alan Lambert. Now, this one's going to be a replay, and I actually initially live recorded this, and I know, Alan, my friend, that you prefer live recorded. I hope this is going to be better for you than the live recorded would be. Lately, so a few things to say. Lately, people have been responding really well to the replays, just in the comments. And I'm getting a good feel for, like, when I'm making content, as I'm making it, as I'm recording it live, I can tell, okay, this just isn't, like, great to watch. Whereas most times with a replay, I can take away the factors that made it not great to watch. If an opponent's really slow playing, on a replay, that's not a factor. So, in other words, I'm getting to the point now, I'm experienced enough where I know kind of right away whether whether these league games, are better suited to replays or to being live or recorded. And in this case, I think our matchups were definitely better suited to the replay. But there's another factor here too. We had a really, really binary league in terms of the matchups that we played. I won't spoil it right here at the beginning fully, but suffice to say that we played a lot of the same style deck and pretty much only the same style of opposing deck in this league. So by kind of reworking this content into a replay, I'm also doing it so I can give you a bonus league at the end. I'm going to show you 6 rounds. The 6th round is going to be from my warm-up games in the tournament practice lobby to get a little bit familiar with the deck, showing you a matchup against a deck that we're actually designed to beat. You know what I mean? So anyway, that's the purpose behind the content here, and without further ado, thank you to the Patreons, and let's jump right in. Winning the die roll, my friends, and I do keep this hand, but let the record state, I think it's a little bit sketchy because we have no interaction. However, being on the play, if we draw even one piece of interaction, that can snowball the game, and I don't like to mulligan in game ones where I don't know what I'm up against, so the thing to do here is just play out the goose and see what happens. But obviously, if we draw any kind of interaction that lines up well against the opponent, that's going to be what we want. That's the most desirable. So opponent will go turn 1, bolt the goose off of a basic mountain. So who knows what we're against? It could be a few different things, but, a controlled style deck, a mid-range style deck, or a red deck win style deck all might have incentives to bolt the goose. So we just play out the Tarmogoyf and say go. Opponent will go Soulscar Mage into Mishra's Bauble, but they do not have a second land drop, and it is back to us. So we are against Mono Red Prowess, and we have drawn the missing piece of the puzzle. We've drawn an actual piece of interaction. Now, Fatal Push would have probably been our best draw here, but Inquisition is a pretty close second if you ask me. Now, in response, opponent will bauble us. I think that's a misplay. It's just growing the Goyf for no particular reason. They could wait until after combat, right? But anyway, Inquisition will resolve, and we see 2 copies of Light Up the Stage. So, in general, Light Up the Stage is kind of the best sorcery against us, like in a vacuum, because it is just a 2-for-1. And we care a lot about card advantage, and we care a lot about interacting with them and keeping them off of cards. However, in this situation, I don't think we worry at all about the Light Up the Stages, because we just have them stuck on a 1-lander, and if they do get a second land, then okay, maybe the Light Ups become valid, they become active, but it's all going to be a little bit slow in light of our progression. So with that in mind, I think we want to take either Swifty or Lava Dart, and Lava Dart being very, very good with Soulscar Mage at shrinking a Goyf, and being their way to turn on light ups, should they hit that second land. I think that's the clear take. Now, they can flash it back, but obviously on only 1 land, they're not going to want to do that. And that also grows the Goyf very nicely to a 5/6. We play a second Goyf, and the opponent just can't handle it. So that was not a Field of the Jund progression at all. Well, okay, maybe it was actually, because we played Gilded Goose, which we normally, of course, would not in regular Jund, but really what won this game was Goyf turn 2, turn 3, Inquisition into Goyf. They're 5/6s. The opponent just simply can't deal with them. Alright, so as far as I can tell, we are against kind of stock Mono Red Prowess, and here's how we sideboard. We have 7 cards that we've brought in, 3 Collective Brutality, 2 Plague Engineer, and 2 Nihil Spellbomb. Plague Man is only okay, but it's better than a lot of what we cut, right? So we cut 2 copies of Wrenn and Six, 1 Hour of Promise, so we're kind of trimming away from the slower top-end stuff. We have to take out all 3 Dark Confidant, it's by far the worst card in the matchup, and we also lose 1 Thoughtseize, but note that that means we leave 1 in. I have long been on record as somebody who likes to leverage exactly 1 Thoughtseize against Mono-Red Prowess. They are a synergy deck. They're not a burn deck. Burn is a redundancy deck. Burn is a deck where, like, every card virtually does the same thing. It's a deal 3, mostly, is what their cards do. Prowess is a synergy deck. They're more vulnerable to Thoughtseize as a form of disruption, whereas Thoughtseize is just such a liability against a regular burn. And if they're on Bedlam Reveler, which I think they are with no companion in sight, then that's another reason to leverage exactly 1 Thoughtseize. You know, if you cast 2, if you draw 2, that becomes a liability, right? But I like to leverage exactly 1. Opponent will keep 7 and go turn 1 Goblin Guide, and that just kind of somewhat blows what I said out of the water. Now, they're still definitely doing Prowess things. They're still playing Lava Dart. They still might be on Bedlam Reveler, but Goblin Guide is not a stock Prowess card, at least before Companion changed everybody's ideas about the deck, right? So I didn't really talk about our opening hand. It's a fine one. It's a little slow. Of course, we really would want 1 mana interaction, but it's a functional hand. We are lining up a turn 2 Brutality, which is always awesome, and with that in mind, I do think it's a keep. So we've drawn Fatal Push off the top. That's a really nice draw. Why am I fetching main phase? Well, I fetch main phase because if they have Light Up the Stage and we fetch on their turn, even though we're going to push Goblin Guide before it does any damage to us, our fetch is still life loss, which will still turn on Spectacle for the opponent. So we want to fetch main phase and then pass. And yes, that bluffs that we do have a Fatal Push. There's no other reason we'd do that, but that is what it is. Now, another thing to talk about, really interesting little micro decisions here, is that I pitched this Wooded Foothills, discarded it to hand size. Why? Well, I already have kind of enough lands, and I'm basically taking a little bit of a gamble. So if the Goblin Guide triggers successfully from our perspective and flips us a land, then it will be really good to have discarded a hand size, because right now we have enough lands to operate. We're not really so much concerned about getting to 5, 6, 7 mana in this matchup. We're concerned with finding more interaction and especially finding a threat that can take over the game like our Tarmogoyfs did in Game 1. So with that in mind, I say, okay, let's ditch the Wooded Foothills and let's try to let the Goblin Guide dig us through the deck a little bit more, because naturally drawing a land off the top would be a disaster. And sure enough, that works, so we are rewarded for a somewhat high-risk line, you know, in the context of it being a micro decision. It's a high-risk line, right? So we get to push the guide. So far, so good. And the opponent on another 1-lander, so it is back to us. Unfortunately, we have had another land off the top, so I guess that makes 4 lands off the top plus 1 Fatal Push if we count those 2 Goblin Guide triggers, right? But anyway, I shock in to make our 2 other colors, and especially red, which allows me to pitch the other 2 red lands, keep the Verdant Catacombs around because we want a lot of green if we draw Scavenging Ooze, and then fully escalate a Collective Brutality. So we see that the opponent has another threat in hand. The triple threat hand is a little bit tough to deal with on the draw a lot of the time, but at least we've removed 2 things so far. And then, of course, Brutality, we're seeing they have a very powerful hand. It's Lava Dart, it's Lava Spike, it's Lightning Bolt, and it is Light Up the Stage. So there's a lot. There we go. We got slowed down a little bit by the client here. I hate clicking through, but didn't manage not to do that. We did take Light Up the Stage simply because it is a 2-for-1, and our life total is still high enough that we do want to play for the long game. But unfortunately, there's land number 5 off the top, and also unfortunately, we have Trophy as our only remaining removal, and therefore we are gonna ramp them out of their mana screw, or their land screw, perhaps. So the opponent drew Soulscar Mage for turn. Because they show this to us before damage, I do decide to take the 1 from Swifty and get rid of Soulscar, because basically at this point, one of our best draws is Tarmogoyf. If Tarmogoyf comes down, I don't want the Soulscar to be able to whittle it down, you know. I'd much rather have them unable to answer the Tarmogoyf or have to, like, truly 2-for-1 themselves to deal with it, or maybe even 3-for-1 if Lava Dart has to be flashed back. Unfortunately, all of that is a little bit beyond the purview of our considerations because we're just drawing land number 6 off the top. And I do decide to run out the Plague Man into a known death. Now, why did I do that? Number one, because it gave them the chance to do exactly what they might have done, which is bolt on our turn, which you understand for mana efficiency, but it does save us a prowess trigger. At this point, we kind of have to hope that they start flooding off the top, and therefore their mana would not have been an issue, and the damage that we saved would have been. And number two, we just got to use our mana here. We got to do something efficient with our turn, because we got to hope we're going to draw something like Scavenging Ooze or, even Hour of Promise. There are a couple still left in the deck. And look, there's land number 7 off the top off of Goblin Guide and land number 8 off the top for our turn. So, we're documenting the Flood. The Flood is real. The Flood is, in fact, biblical. And we are, in fact, dead because the opponent just has lethal in hand and we've got nothing. And let's just see what Goblin Guide's going to show us. Well, it's land number 9. So we kept a 4-land hand, which is definitely very reasonable in a 24-land mid-range deck, especially because we have ways to use excess lands like that Collective Brutality. We drew, the top of our deck yielded 1 Fatal Push, which was a good draw, and 9 lands, and none of them were utility. It was all fetch lands and basic lands and shock lands, so not much you can do there. Very binary game 1 and game 2 here. Let's see what happens in game 3. Alright guys, we've got a solid opener on the play here. I wish this Bloodstained Mire was a green fetch land. That would be ideal to just play basic forest here. Partially because some of the prowess players do bring in Blood Moon, and partially because it would just be, of course, less painful, alright? However, there are some upsides to having access to 2 shock lands here, namely the ability to cast both Push and Bolt on the same turn if we need to. Unfortunately for us, opponent not only keeps 7, but has the best turn 1 play here, which is Goblin Guide. It's the only thing that Goose can't block short of, like, Swifty into Bauble, right? But Goblin Guide continues being the best guide in the land, hitting us a free Field of the Dead, and we draw another land off the top. So I'm starting to worry a little bit about flooding just like we did last game, but at least for now we're casting all of our spells. And I debated about which land to run out, but I decided Bloodstained Mire, because if we need to double spell with our 2 removal spells this turn, we can, and if not, we can fetch a green shock land. But the opponent's got another Goblin Guide, and the first one does not yield a trigger. So another reason to do this is just in case they have double Goblin Guide, we can let the first trigger resolve. If it does not yield us a land, we can then shuffle that card away and try to get another look at a land before the second trigger resolves. So one of the reasons I love playing against Burn and Prowess, it's good fair magic. You have a clear role. Both players have a clear role, but it's not just a very binary thing like the games can go long. And there's lots of really interesting micro decisions. We've seen a lot of them here in round 1. So second bite at the cherry, still no free land from the Goblin Guide. We've got Trophy off the top. Not very exciting, but we are continuing to curve out. We play the Goyf. We've got this food token waiting in the wings, and we get our Field of the Dead down. And Soulscar Mage is the play for the opponent, and for the 3rd game in a row, they're on a 1-lander, but for the 2nd game in a row, we face the prospect of ramping them out of the 1-lander with Assassin's Trophy. So I took a little bit of a weird line here, definitely an unconventional one. I thought about it for a while, and I decided, you know what, I'm just so choked on green mana that I'm going to use the Goose to make green, to play Wrenn and Six, and then play Bloodstained Mire. And I do feel obligated to trophy away the Soulscar Mage because, again, Soulscar is one of their only efficient ways to deal with Goyf. So after attacks, we're going to go ahead and do that and trophy it away. I did it on the upkeep to give them maximum tension between, if they have burn, do they fire it off at the Goyf in response, something like that. But we could have done it after attacks on our turn, could have done You could have waited till after attacks on their turn, too. There's no one clear way to do that. There's pros and cons to all of them. But we've given them the second land, then they've drawn the third land, and we just unlocked their hand. Look at this. Triple creature. Right out of the gates, all with haste. This Goblin Guide gives us a land, so thanks. But then the opponent attacks a Wrenn and Six off the field. I'm so cool with that. I kind of get why they would do that. Maybe they think they can't beat Field of the Dead, but this grows Tarmogoyf, and more importantly, it preserves our life total. I was happy to see that, but I don't know their hand, and it might have been the best play for them to make anyway, right? But for now, I'm definitely cool with it. So I'm going to just use this turn to make a food token with Goose. We're going to pass, holding up the other trophy we've drawn, which is, again, worse than most other alternatives, but still a pretty fine draw. Opponent with a pretty crazy turn as it appears. They go Lava Spike into Light Up the Stage, and all of this is fueled by our trophy, in terms of them having the lands to do it, into Sunbaked Canyon, Mishra's Bauble off the Light Up the Stage. Very, very powerful turn. And this incentivizes the all-out attack. Now, they might have an instant, they might not. I think maybe they have enough prowess triggers to attack regardless, so we're just going to block and see what they have. If they have 2 instants, then they can kill our Goyf in combat, right? But they have Stomp, so that's also pretty bad as well. And actually, 1 instant is going to be sufficient to kill the Goyf in combat if it targets the Goyf, and that's exactly what happens. So we trophy the other Swifty because otherwise we're dead, and we got to lose we've been reduced to chump blocking with a 5/6 Goyf. How often does that happen? And we draw land for turn. So it's looking pretty grim on the face of it. We're at 5 life, the opponent's got a board, they've got Bone Crusher waiting in the wings, Mishra's Bauble ready for the redraw, but Basic Forest was actually a pretty clutch draw, just because it's going to make Scavenging Ooze actually relevant. We were, as I said, choked on green mana for quite some time, but Skoos being able to come down and immediately become a 4/4, as long as they're not sitting on a Lightning Bolt in hand, which, given their sequencing, I do not expect them to have, and they don't, that is very, very nice. And on top of that, remember, we've got the Goose, who's made another food token. I'm just going to main phase it. It's very unorthodox for Prowess decks to play a card like Skullcrack, but I've seen stranger things, right? So playing around any anti-life gain effects by just main phasing that, we lose our ability to bluff, but I think that's fine. Opponent plays the Bone Crusher, rolls out with the Goblin Guide and the Swifty, so we know there's going to be some kind of removal imminent, but let's make him have it. This is still really, really good for us. And it's even better because they have to flash back a land. That means something, right? So they have to double Lava Dart. But then again, double Lava Dart means double Prowess trigger for the Swifty. So we are still definitely on the ropes looking for a good top deck. We've drawn Abrupt Decay, and that's actually pretty sweet. It's going to allow us to play Blood Crypt tapped, so we don't have to take the pain. We get to make a zombie, and we get to do everything we want to do this turn, which is make a food token with the Goose, crack it main phase, and still be holding up Abrupt Decay. So, Gilded Goose shining in the late game. As I said in the intro, this is why it is viable to have Gilded Goose as a mana dork in the right mid-range shell, where other mana dorks are simply not viable. Now, the opponent rips a Leyline of Combustion off the top of the deck for their turn, so this is leading to another really interesting decision. So, Abrupt Decay can kill either Bone Crusher or Swifty, but we're taking 2 to kill the Bone Crusher, and then later we're taking 2 to do anything else, including killing Monastery Swiftspear. So it was an interesting call, but because Swifty is going to have prowess this turn and our zombie cannot do anything besides chump block either, I decide to decay the Swifty in response. So my thinking here is that maybe we will play a game where we never remove the Bone Crusher Giant, and therefore we are dodging the tax effects of both Leyline and Bone Crusher to the best of our ability, kind of trying to race the Bone Crusher with our board, gaining 3 life every turn, attacking for 2, lands become more threats, actual threats off the top are obviously threats. If we draw interaction, which is normally what we'd want to draw, it becomes a little bit more complicated. But that was my reasoning there. You could definitely, I think, have decayed either one, but definitely an interesting call. And we draw Plague Engineer, which is fine. Definitely a fine one. Again, it's something that lets us do everything we want to do with the Gilded Goose. And we're just going to name Human to reduce their top decks. We remember that we have already gone through 3 Goblin guides, so while if we'd only seen like one Goblin guide, I might name Goblin there. Here, I think it's nice to name Human. So we're just racing and trying to force them to find removal for the Plague Man. Plague Man lines up really well against Bone Crusher Giant, but of course they do have removal for the Plague Man in the form of Bolt. And then they have Lava Dart. They're going low on lands, between cracking Canopy lands to find this action and then using that Lava Dart. But hey, they have dealt with our Goose. So we're in a lot of trouble. We're down on the ropes. We're at 5 life. And we draw Field of Ruin. Super interesting draw. So this makes us a zombie number 1. But it can also make us another zombie if we utilize it, which is really nice. And it takes them off of Sunbait Canyon while they're tapped out. So a really good find. But you have to remember that Leyline of Combustion still triggers, even though it's a land targeting a land. This reads, you and or at least one permanent you control becomes the target of a spell or ability an opponent controls. So we go down to 3 for that. I made the judgment call. I thought it was worth it. Obviously, this makes us dead to Lightning Bolt, but you know what? If we didn't get that other zombie, and if we gave them the potential of another draw off of Sunbait Canyon, well, there you go. That might have been worse on average, I thought. So again, remember, Prowess is a synergy deck, not a burn deck. Our incentives might have been different against burn. Opponent declines to attack, it is back to us. We rip another Gilded Goose off the top, Goose putting in a shift here. I thought about attacking. Attacking is interesting, but ultimately decided against it. And then, once again, just choosing to main phase the food token just for fear of something that almost certainly doesn't exist, but no real reason not to. Opponent with a lava spike off the top, so the Goose came just in time to save us from the lava spike. And then we are ripping Swamp for turn, which again would be a death sentence under most circumstances, but in this Field of the Dead deck, it actually does something. So first order of business, make our food token, gain our life. Second order of business, play this zombie out. And then I do decide after some deliberation to attack. It would have been better practice if we were going to attack, of course, to attack before showing them what our play for turn was. Nevertheless, I like putting them to 4 here, and, I think the aggressive stance here in context is warranted. Opponent playing an Abbot of Carol Keep Out. A little bit scary, but ultimately only a 2-1. I do decide to chump block just because I'm a little, I kind of psyched myself into this. I'm just worried about what they're representing with this last land. But I think I might have actually missed a trick here. I think they might, I would have to go back. I went through this a little bit too quickly. I think they might have failed to find a basic, strangely enough, off of the Field of Ruin. So if that's the case, do they have anything to fetch? Not necessarily. So it's possible that we should not have chump blocked there, but I feel like I'm the one who's in charge. I psyched myself into it, like I said, playing a little bit safe here. But we're making more zombies, Field of the Dead and Gilded Goose together, taking over the game. And then we're swinging in for lethal here, forcing the opponent to chump block with Abbot of Carol Keep. And we're up to 9 life, where we've got another zombie in the tank with Verdant Catacombs, but this time I decide not to show them that until necessary, because number one, the 1 life could matter in a really weird situation, but probably not. More importantly, they might be looking at our board and saying, okay, they have 2 swamps, 2 forests, and 3 shocklands. Do they have anything to fetch? Well, they might wonder if we do, but we actually do. We can fetch Sheltered Thicket. One of the reasons that's a cool inclusion, it is fetchable, right? So, opponent with Grim Lavamancer, which would have been a very scary card, even a turn or 2 earlier, but as it is, we don't care about it. This time, we just take the hit, and they are dead on board, so we'll make our food token for good measure, and we will also not lightning bolt them unless something really weird happens, because that's another thing that can turn on Leyline of Combustion, and we'll attack, see what that last card is, if anything, and it's just nothing. They fetch failing to find, and they lose. So a game 1 that they scooped up on turn 3, a game 2 that we drew 9 out of 10 cards off the top of our deck as lands. And then game 3 goes to turn 13 and is super grindy and is won by a combination of food tokens and zombie tokens. So this was a really cool match. And again, this is just like I said, why I love BGX versus Red deck wins. Win or lose, it's one of my favorite ways to play Modern. It's increasingly one of the only things that feels like good, honest Magic in the Modern format. So, just some meta commentary here. I think the Field of the Dead build is not, frankly, designed to beat these decks, but the incidental value of Gilded Goose is definitely really nice here, and of course we have Brutalities out of the side, which are really nice as well. But broadly speaking, the ethos of our deck that seeks to leverage, really grindy stuff like Field of the Dead, Wrenn and Six, Hour of Promise, definitely not at its very best here. So the fact that we can come away with a win, pretty cool with me. And here we are with a really nice, in some ways, opener in a blind game 1 for round 2. It is very dependent on curving out with Wrenn and Six, though, because we've got a clunky top end of Tracker into Hour of Promise, but Wrenn and Six can make those things great, and we have turn 1 Inquisition to punch a hole in the opponent's game plan. So with that in mind, we have to fetch and shock here, in my estimation, just, of course, so we can land that Wrenn on curve, only to find another Burn deck. This one is playing Lurrus of the Dream Den. So this is basically Lurrus Burn, just like the old way, as far as I can tell, pre-companion nerf. That is to say, a red-white Boros Burn deck with most of the usual stuff, plus Mishra's Bauble and Lurrus to make it all tick. I decided to take Boros Charm there. Definitely a pretty interesting call. Leaving the Goblin guide, I think, is correct, because even though we don't have removal, just because we have Tarmogoyf, and the guide, of course, we're hoping for some free lands off of it, sure enough. The guide complies. Guides have been very generous to us. Opponent will show us Inspiring Vantage. Whoops, I closed out of a land there that I didn't mean to, but we know their whole hand because they did not open on Vantage. And we've drawn Scavenging Ooze, so a couple good finds off the top, but still no removal. Hopefully Goyf will hold the line well enough for us to get there. And opponent once again showing us a land that we did not know about. And Goblin Guide declines to attack. So one of the reasons it was interesting to maybe take Lightning Bolt instead of Boros Charm was because that leaves them the option of 2-for-1ing themselves to get rid of our Goyf with Goblin Guide plus Lightning Bolt. However, I rationalized that maybe they won't even do that, so I'll just take the higher upside card of Boros Charm, and indeed that proves to be the case. So having drawn Scooze and being against traditional Burn, I just feel it is, and also lacking interaction of any kind that's relevant, I felt that it was very much a losing strategy to simply sit back and, have a stare down with Goyf and Goblin Guide while also not really doing anything else, maybe playing a Scooze, whatever. But I think we have to race here. So I play out the Scooze, knowing that it's able to die, but, at least maybe they'll have to point a Lightning Bolt at it, and at least we can eat the Mishra's Bauble there, which I think is the thing to eat here. It does shrink the Goyf, so that's definitely not nothing, but we have to assume that we're going to take it to the long game. If we don't take it to the long game, by definition, we'll already have lost, right? And if we take it to the long game, I think taking away the Lurrus loop is what's relevant. But Dark Confidant off the top, not exactly what we wanted to see, right? So it's Tracker into Stomping Ground, and make no mistake, it is still a losing line to sit back here and play defense against the creatures and let them draw Burn off the top. But now that we're at 7, I think we basically have to, because we're just pretty much dead to a single Burn spell if we don't. So we successfully ward off the attacks. We're trying to find interaction. We're trying to find a way to stabilize. Like double kill spell here would have allowed us to race. Instead, we have Inquisition and Fatal Push. Seems pretty good, but we only have 1 black mana. So as nice as it is to be flush with green in this matchup, our mana's actually pretty awkward. This leads me to make the judgment call of leaning on Fatal Push, not on Inquisition, rationalizing that It's possible they can dump their hand in response to an Inquisition. Fatal Push is always going to be live, and if they don't have much to do, they're likely to do exactly as they did, which is crack the canyon. Therefore, Inquisition might be live next turn, right? If we get a next turn. So that was the thinking there. But again, it would have been nice to just be able to do both. But opponent pretty desperately cracking those canopy lands, which really works out for us. Obviously, we're getting pretty lucky that we're not just dead to burn off the top, but our sequencing also, it must be said, has been rewarded. I push the Goblin Guide there, and then we do go ahead and Inquisition, and we see they're just getting really unlucky with the Flood. 3 lands and a Skewer the Critics in hand. Inquisition takes the Skewer, and they are deterministically dead here because we attack. As I guess after they chump, they are deterministically dead. Having followed up with a Tarmogoyf, there's just nothing they can have with only one card that I know of. So they rip a burn spell, but it's too little, too late. So sideboarding against Lurrus Burn is basically similar to Prowess in that, yes, you do want Nihil Spellbombs, especially when you're on a deck like ours and when you have a lot of bad cards to cut. The only difference is I don't want any Thoughtseizes, so I leave an extra Wrenn and Six in for a total of 3, which is a high number against Burn, but again, they do some things, whereas Thoughtseize is pretty much just something that has to come out. OP keeping 7 with a really nice turn 1 of Swifty into Bauble. Our hand is a borderline keep, make no mistake. It really sucks to have no interaction, but I rate Tarmogoyf very highly, and I feel weirdly pressured against Lurrus Burn not to mulligan. This is one reason I just really dislike the design of Companion, and you know, make no mistake, again, a borderline keep, I fully acknowledge that, but I hate the built-in inevitability of Companion, much like our own built-in inevitability of Field of the Dead. This is just not my style of Magic. Like, I like the prospect of things dying and staying dead, unless people have specifically built their deck to accommodate that. So whereas against traditional pre-Companion Burn, I would have been like, you know, I feel like I can mulligan more aggressively to find the really good cards that I need and try to operate on fewer resources and still get over the line. I just feel like I can't win doing that against Lurrus. Lurrus has such inevitability, being a free 8th card that himself generates card advantage. So that was my thinking there. Again, nevertheless, it is very possible that we just take our lumps and we play 6 cards or fewer against 8 or more, and try to win anyway. But with the presence of Tarmogoyf on turn 2, I said, let's not mulligan, let's see what we've got. But the opponent, with a really scary curve out here, Swifty into Bauble into Boros Charm. We've drawn Gilded Goose, so we're drawing things that can, in theory, stabilize us. But first of all, let's try to survive. Tarmogoyf is not especially tasty as a blocker here. Number 1, it just would straight up die to Lightning Bolt there because we haven't managed to get a sorcery or a creature in the yard yet. That's the lack of interaction for you. And then the opponent will attack, so we figure, okay, they've got to have either 2 instants or something like this, but I didn't really expect this card exactly, Searing Blood. Okay, you Burn players out there will have to let me know. This doesn't seem like a good card against us to me, but I am no Burn expert. I freely admit that I could be wrong. Nevertheless, it is very, very good in that spot. Opponent will suspend a Rift Bolt, and then we draw a Fatal Push. So, a fine draw insofar as it allows us to play the Goose, hold up interaction. For once, we're not having to trophy the Red Deck Wins player. We are just getting to push instead. We do have that trophy in hand, though. And, you know, we've got to deal with Lurrus eventually if we're going to stick in this game, so definitely a good draw, Fatal Push. Opponent going off there, drawing extra off of Baubles, playing more Baubles, skewering us, putting us to 2, and then moving to attacks where Fatal Push will save us only for Lightning Helix in response to kill us. So opponent very easily turn 4ing us through a Tarmogoyf in a Fatal Push. Just a really good burn curve out on the play. What are you going to do? Well, again, the only thing we could really have done is maybe mulliganed, but the prospect of going to 6 and then beating that curve out with Lurrus waiting in the wings as the second wave doesn't seem likely to me. Alright guys, we're on the play for game 3, but this is a super ugly hand. It doesn't cast a single spell, it has 2 5-drops in it. Definitely a bad one, we have to mulligan, and we mulligan to a really one-dimensional 6. We have the functionality of mana, we have a little bit of utility out of Field of Ruin, and we're flush with all the colors we need. And we have 2 copies of Fatal Push, which is one of our very best early game cards, but it doesn't really do anything else, so we're kind of in a reverse of the situation we were in game 1, round 1, where we have all of the threats and we just need to draw a single relevant piece of interaction. Now we're in the opposite boat, where we have all of the relevant early interaction, we just need to draw a threat that capitalizes on this, namely Tarmogoyf or Scavenging Ooze, as usual in this matchup. So we push their turn 1 threat, we untap, we draw Bojuka Bog. Another land is obviously a disaster. I made a kind of interesting call to Bojuka Bog away the Swifty, just to get a tap land down while we can, and to take away future Lurrus fuel, but of course that also takes away Goyf and Skooz fuel, if we find those, right? So it also makes our colors a little bit awkward, but you know, anything in our deck besides Wrenn and Six, which is not a good draw anyway, can be cast off of one of these lands plus black, right? So I unstep Fatal Push their Eidolon of the Great Revel. Having no other spells in hand, there's actually a non-zero argument to untap, maybe incentivize them to take some damage off of their own Eidolon before we push it, before it does damage in the attack phase. But, you know, I'm optimistic here. I'm hoping to draw something to do this turn, but instead we draw Wrenn and Six. As I was just saying, not a very good draw here, but kind of one of the bad cards that has to stay in given our configuration here. And I do decide to main phase Field of Ruin, so my new plan here is to try to strand cards in their hand, and it's actually not the most unreasonable plan ever. So by attacking Sunbaked Canyon, we reduce their amount of flood insurance. You might say that's kind of bad in some ways because they're still operating off of one canyon, and we could, in theory, have accelerated their tempo by giving them an untapped mountain there. Maybe they bolt us end step and they just race us that much faster. That's an acceptable risk, though, because right now, number 1, maybe they don't have another threat. We've already killed 2. Maybe we can strand Lurrus in hand by attacking a white land. Number 2, we now have the ability to, over a couple turns, loop Wrenn and Six, attack their other Sunbaked Canyon, and strand not only Lurrus in the companion zone, but white cards in general in their hand. Number 3, we know that Searing Blood has come in from the sideboard, and therefore we assume that Searing Blaze is also in the deck. If we don't have a creature, which currently we don't, those are many, many cards that, all things considered, could be stranded in hand. And yes, you know, that's a lot of ifs, but at this point, given our mulligan, given our bad hand and bad top decks, that's kind of where we're at. We kind of have to hope for some really interesting things going our way. Unfortunately, the opponent has found a second threat and a Rift Bolt as well. So it's Wrenn and Six, buy back the Field of Ruin time. This is not exactly the matchup where we want to try to be fielding them out of the game now, is it? But again, it's all we really have available to us. Opponent just continuing to really have mostly everything they could want in context of our hand. They go Rift Bolt into Boros Charm, into hit for 3 with the Swifty. But the Field of Ruin plan, my friends, is still online, and we have found a creature too. So hey, here's our chance to put everything I was just saying into practice. We field them off of white. We do have a threat. We'll buy back the field. We still have a bunch of bricks in hand, but at least we have, in theory, begun to stabilize. But opponent says, no way. Here's another white land, and here's a Searing Blaze. So could it get any worse? Nah, I mean, it could get worse if they had killed us instead of suspending a Rift Bolt for the last spell, but we are still very, very dead. So hey, what are you going to do? A couple really good burn progressions, really tough for us to handle. Our top decks did us no favors. Our opening hands didn't really do us any favors. Again, do we beat this progression by mulling to 5? I have to say, no, we don't. So I don't think there was really much that we could do here. I think keeping the double Fatal Push hand, it was sufficient upside in this matchup to run with, but didn't pan out for us. Oh well. So another red deck wins variant. This time it was Lurrus Burn, and we are 1-1 in the league. Round 3 on the draw, my friends, and it's a fine one in the blind, but if you listen to the intro, you heard me say we played against a lot of samey decks in this league. Well, therefore, no surprise that even though it's a blind for me as I was playing this, you maybe knew what was coming. So, turn 1, Mountain into Swifty, another red deck wins deck, and this looks like we're back against Classic Prowess so far is what it looks like, no companion. And we see the rest of their hand is 2 more lands, including a Canopy land, Crash Through, Lava Dart, and Monastery Swift Spear. Pretty easy take there of Swifty, I think, because we only have 1 removal spell, and it's our bad one. It's Trophy, right? So, just got to kill the threats here under these circumstances. Opponent goes Mountain into Crash Through. And surprisingly choosing not to Lava Dart us, but then it all makes sense because they found Light Up the Stage, which reveals Mountain Lava Spike. Some pretty great stuff for the opponent, you have to say. So right out of the gates, we are on the ropes here, and remember that Prowess is a deck that can find a really nice second wind via Bedlam Reveler. So Mountain and Spike for free coming out of exile. Swifty's going to come after us here, and the opponent has also found Lightning Bolt, so the gas continues. And then here's the Lava Dart we knew about. We're remaining disciplined with our trophy, waiting until the last possible moment, seeing if they decide to shove all in with the flashback. And indeed they do. Now's our time to trophy. We hit them, so we don't take any damage, but we are down to 8. And then more lands off the top, kind of more of the same, right? We've had a lot of flood issues so far this league, and they are continuing, you know. With Tracker, it's all well and good, but not so much when you're on the ropes like this with your life total, right? So I do just run out the Skoos. We have no other choice there in my view. Obviously, ideally, we like safer windows for Skoos, specifically to become a 4-4, but we don't have the luxury of time right now. And against Prowess specifically, unlike Burn, a lot of their removal spells only do 2 damage, whether they be a Shock variant or a Lava Dart, so getting to 3 is definitely something. Opponent pressed into beginning with a cracked Canopy land, and then going Monomorphos, they find Lightning Bolt, Burst Lightning, and they decide to ignore the Skoos and go right upstairs with both, and we draw another land right off the top. So, hey, we can gain another life, and we can go to 3, again, getting out of Shock and Lava Dart range, and that's all well and good, but we're not going to go back to 2 just to play a Balduvian Barbarians, which is what Tracker is right now. So instead we crack Peatland. We find Tarmogoyf, which is cool. Can't cast it yet this turn, though. So we just all in on the opponent bricking. Like, we can beat 1 Shock. We can maybe beat 1 creature as well. We can beat a Shock or a creature, but a little more help from the deck would be great instead of just drawing more fetch lands. So we'll play out the Goyf. We're going to eat away at the graveyard, making their Bedlam Revelers more awkward, and just trying to race with Scoozy. And so far, you know, we are in with a slim chance, but you know, another Goyf off the top, well, okay, this allows us to beat maybe a creature and a Shock. So we're actually looking like we're going to get there. We attack for 7, put them to 5, and it's been really slow and really awkward and really clunky, but we are defending against a haste threat while representing overwhelmingly lethal, while doing a little bit of disrupting of Bedlam Reveler, and now they only have 4 instants and sorceries in the graveyard, so even though they can resolve a Bedlam Reveler, maybe they cannot cast any spells after doing so, depending on what they draw off of it. So, against all odds, we are able to potentially kill them this upcoming turn, but opponent has been sitting on either the Shock or the Lava Dart for a while now, and then they found the other one. So close yet so far. If we had drawn even one piece of non-fetch land action. Frankly, even if our fetch lands were just kind of basic lands or potentially even shock lands, depending on when they came down, maybe we could have played a tracker earlier, maybe we would have won the race. I'm not exactly sure. We'd need to really go over those turns with a fine-tooth comb, and that's just not worth it. It is what it is. This is how it went down. Yeah, more flooding, and painful flooding at that against the Prowess deck. What are you going to do? So it was close. They did brick for a little bit, long enough for our league MVP Tarmogoyf to maybe cheat our way over the line here, steal the game. Skooz obviously very relevant to that role as well. Didn't quite happen. Alright guys, we've already covered sideboarding against Prowess on the play here for Game 2, and it's a hand with a whole lot of cards we really like to see, unfortunately. Snow-covered swamp, one lander. It doesn't cast a single spell besides Nihil Spellbomb. We have to mulligan that, and it's very, very much a shame. That was a great hand, but that is what it is. We got a mull, and we're going to keep this 6. It's a pretty strong 6. No threat, though. It's not a balanced hand. It just has a lot of interaction, but that's fine. We've got our one of Thoughtseize. Remember, I do like to leverage that. And I chose to bottom basic mountain because I'm planning to get basic swamp in order to Thoughtseize and not take 5 for our turn 1, only take 3, right? Opponent also mulligan, to be fair, and we see Crash Through, Kiln Fiend, Lightning Bolt, Monomorphose, and Double Mountain. In that case, I do choose to take Lightning Bolt because Kiln Fiend is very, very dead to our wide variety of spells, and Monomorphose can be awkward. As a Prowess player, I can tell you this firsthand, if you don't have the right kind of supporting cast for it. So I thought Crash Through is actually kind of a viable take there, but given our pain that we've kind of self-imposed with the Thoughtseize and with this fetch land, probably having to fetch and shock, unless we want to cut ourselves off of a color, I just take the Lightning Bolt away. And also, the ability to ensure that they won't have a good response to our turn 2 brutality, like firing off the bolt in response and leaving us with fewer options here, was also on my radar. But as it turns out, we get a really nice top deck of Tarmogoyf, so of course that is our play rather than the turn 2 brutality. Brutality, though, would have been fine there just because we had more removal in reserve for the Kiln Fiend. We don't strictly need the brutality to kill the Kiln Fiend with. And having drawn Bloodstained Mire, I decide to leave both removal spells in hand, although there is some argument for full escalation, maybe pitching the Fatal Push and just relying on Trophy to deal with one more threat and hoping it's good enough to erase them with Tarmogoyf. But Tarmogoyf is still a 5-turn clock either way, even if we drain them for 2. So just like ditching a Fatal Push to gain 2 life, I did not feel was strictly necessary. And we take away another Lightning Bolt following the same principles that we outlined with that turn 1 Thoughtseize. So opponent will kick off their turn 3 of the Monomorphose. They'll find a Soulscar Mage. This is something we can deal with. Of course, we just Fatal Push it and attack. And, playing this deck, where I believe we have 15, 15, 14 black, green, red sources, we haven't really had consistency besides maybe with our opening hands. Like, once we're making our land drops, we're consistently casting our spells. But it's just worth noting, I mentioned that Pillage is something I shied away from. We play Stone Rain instead due to that reason. Also, the lack of 17 or 18 black sources, which we usually want in Jund for Liliana, definitely comes up. Like, right now, we're not holding Assassin's Trophy. We're not holding up Assassin's Trophy, and, we can cast all of our spells consistently, but we can't double spell consistently with 2 black spells. Now, as it turns out, it doesn't matter here, but as always, I'm trying to offer, broader commentary in these leagues, especially when it's replay time. So that's just another point in favor of our good, consistent mana bases. Not saying that the mana base is wrong for our purposes here, but as an admonition against getting too greedy when you're on a stock BGX list, right? Anyway, that aside, opponent has found some good stuff. They've Lava Spiked us, and Burst Lightning us, and now Lava Darted us, and they found a Swifty. So their top decks have been really hot, and once again, we'll wait till the last possible moment, tempting the flashback, which they do go for, only to get trophied. And meanwhile, despite their really good draws, Goyf is just implacably closing out the game here. We've drawn Plague Man. Sure, that's fine. That's fine. Insurance policy, a secondary threat and blocker, but opponent playing totally off the top, and they find Fiery Islet. They crack it. They crash through. They play Soulscar. So they're sticking in there, very determined to try to extend the game, but we got another removal spell. That's going to do it. All right, guys, round 3, game 3, and we've got like a really clunky looking hand. If you just like glance at the lands, it looks like it's all haphazard, and in some ways it is. You know, Field of the Dead, colorless ETB tapped, Peatland is a pain land, and 2 fetch lands. You know, it's all very painful and clunky. The hand itself is very medium. It's very medium. We have a lot of interaction, and that's definitely something. And the hand functions, that's definitely something. We see the opponent mulligan to 6, and I decide to keep it. It is a slow and painful and clunky one, but it also is a very serviceable one. So, definitely could go either way, and, you know, I wouldn't really blame anyone for mulling that, but I chose to keep it. I think it is keepable. And we go get Swamp, which again, you know, is kind of awkward. You know, we want to develop green as much as we can. We're going to need red at some point. Having to fetch a basic Swamp is not great, but I judged it to be the best there. You got to remember that Blood Moon is a thing sometimes out of Prowess decks. I don't think it's a great thing, but specifically if they see Jund, and even more specifically if they see Field of the Dead, okay, you know, I can see them playing Blood Moon, right? So, Monomorphose, turn 2, with a Soulscar down, leads to Lava Spike, which leads to Light Up the Stage, which is a certified nut turn 2 from our Prowess friend across the table. I gotta get back into Prowess, man. This is a really fun deck to play. So, we've drawn Dark Confidant. This is story time. Okay, so this is actually kind of funny, kind of like a very funny moment. Obviously, this shouldn't be in the deck. So what happened as I was live recording this is, you know, the first time I faced Prowess, I was like, all right, here we go. Here's the sideboarding, blah, blah, blah. And now the second time we faced Prowess, I say, okay, we already talked about this. You know how to sideboard. I did it quickly. And then I went on a very long lecture about why the one of Thoughtseize is good, which I've already kind of covered here, so I won't relitigate. But very funny dummy moment, hubris moment, where I'm talking all about the nuances of one copy of Thoughtseize and exactly why it is where we want to be in this matchup, I think, especially relative, I'm talking about compared to Wrenn and Six, an Hour of Promise, and getting really into it. And all the while, I just overlooked Dark Confidant and just left him in. We left in, I think, all of our Dark Confidants here, which is a disaster. It is the worst card in the matchup, far worse than Thoughtseize, and just like a complete oversight on my part. So my bad there, and a bad draw. Max punished for just talking while playing, basically. And opponent is just going off over there. We are already at 8, now 7 once we fetch, getting hit down to 6 from the flashback to Lava Dart, and to what would be 2. They would be putting us to 2 on turn 3 if we didn't have this Abrupt Decay. So as it is, we quote-unquote only go to 6, but man, oh man, it is brutal. It is brutal, and we just draw another fetch land off the top, so we are on the ropes, backs to the wall, and we draw Inquisition. Well, that's actually a decent draw with them being tapped out. Obviously, it sucks to have to play it off of Peatland, but like I identified at the beginning, we are going to have mana pain for real this game, and we see Mutagenic Growth. Little surprising to see that still in against us post-board. I would think they would find some way to cut that, but we take Soulscar Mage, and boy am I glad that we did decide to Inquisition, of course, because that means they have a dead card in hand, and we have a little bit of a window. We're down at 3, though, because they've drawn a Shock, they've drawn Firebolt, and we rip Nihil Spellbomb. You know, keeping them, the first Spellbomb was pretty great to keep them off of Bedlam Reveler. This one is a lot less impressive in that regard. We just don't care that much about it anymore. We still use it, though, because we desperately need to find action, and instead we're just drawing more lands. So, lands, and, you know, this Dark Confidant, we draw another one. So, I am only blaming myself here, but realistically, what else are we doing? You know, it'd probably be like a Wrenn and Six in this spot. I don't think that's much better. Nevertheless, I deserve this. Alan, the donor, you don't deserve this. You, the viewer, you don't deserve this, but I deserve to have Dark Confidant's Rotting in hand. That said, our deck doing us no favors otherwise, right? And even though the alternatives weren't great, they would still be better than the uncastable Bobs. No question about it. So, opponent with a Monastery Swiftspear off the top. It's a scary draw, but it's one that we're not dead to. And it's, of course, going to incentivize them to finally play out that mutagenic growth. Thankfully, we have our Assassin's Trophy to deal with it, but we are in big, big trouble, and all we're doing is just playing lands and saying go. We're at 2, they're at 18. What's going to happen? Well, there's a Tarmogoyf off the top. That is something. And we finally get to make zombies off of Field of the Dead. So there's no difference between being at 2 and being at 1. So the first thing we do, because of course Lava Dart can always be flashbacked and everything else does 2 or more. And the haste threats that are 1/2s are not going to get through our zombies, especially if we fetch. So, to that end, we play our fetch land, make a zombie. We fetch, go to 1, make another zombie. And then we can start cracking Peatland because we've already hit the threshold of 7. Then we might as well Inquisition, and we see Bedlam Reveler stuck in hand. Okay, that is a way the opponent's deck can fail. And we've also found a Tarmogoyf for turn as well. So all of a sudden, out of nowhere, we've got a nice big board, and the opponent draws a land for turn. So we draw a land for turn ourselves, we make another zombie. Bobby's watching from the sideline as the Goyfs and the zombies do the work, and the opponent is dead on board. We are representing 11 damage, the opponent's at 9. Will they kill us? Will they die? Well, neither. They draw Monastery Swiftspear, which can chump block and extend the game unless we find removal. We don't find removal, we find Hour of Promise. Man, I wish I had like a Radiant Fountain to tutor here. I don't think it'd be correct to play one, but I really wish I had one to tutor. Instead, we just get another Field of the Dead and some other land of a different name and play another fetch land, and we make 6 zombies this turn. So finally getting a real go-off moment with Field of the Dead and Hour of Promise. And that's all well and good, but that's all kind of beside the point. It's all down to the opponent's top deck. Will they, won't they? And they will play something. It's only another Monastery Swiftspear, so I gotta be honest, guys. We got pretty lucky there. We've had our fair share of bad variants in these red deck wins matchups thus far, and some other decent variants. In this case, we did very well simply, we were very lucky, rather, simply to dodge lethal for whatever that was, 3-4 draw steps in a row. Again, any burn spell is just gonna dome us, and we're just gonna die. Didn't happen, and oh boy, Dark Confidant's in there, major bra moment. So my oversight and sideboarding, not punished, and we narrowly escape with a win against Mono Red Prowess to go 2-1 in the league. Alright guys, it's round 4. We have played against kind of a Prowess deck splashing for Goblin guide. We have played against classic Prowess with Bedlam Revelers, and we've played against classic Lurrus Burn with Lurrus. Will we play against something different in round 4? No. Well, yes and no. We're playing against M. Hayashi, who is maybe still the trophy leader. I don't really pay attention to that. Last time I looked, he was. And he is like the final boss of all Red Deck Wins players because he's always playing some wacky, very cool variant. And this looks like no exception. Jegantha the Wellspring. Okay, that's not exactly normal. Not exactly stock, but let's see what's going on with it. And opponent will lead on Mountain Soul Scarmage, becoming a very familiar sight. Our opening hand is not very good against Burn, but it is a functional opener, and even though with M. Hayashi at the time of playing this, I didn't for sure know he was on some kind of a Red Deck Wins deck. Jegantha threw me off the scent, frankly. I thought, well, is he playing humans, Tron, something else? Nope, it is indeed another Red Deck Wins variant. Lava Dart, Lightning Bolt, Seal of Fire, Mountain in hand. Just go ahead and take the bolt. Definitely a strange brew. Definitely a bit of a strange brew from what we can see thus far. But again, with M. Hayashi, that, my friends, is to be expected. I really respect the dedication to the spice from our opponent here. And unfortunately, it's just kind of more lands for us. So Wrenn and Six, buy back a land is all we've got. Opponent with Abbot of Carol Keep and Ramanop Ruins as their two unknowns. Abbot, fortunately, flipping something uncastable, so no big deal so far for us. And once again, as we saw in an earlier round, opponent spending a fair amount of resources attacking Wrenn and Six off the field, which frankly is pretty much fine with me. Now, we've drawn yet another land for turn, so it goes without saying our top decks have been awful. We've been bricking left, right, and center. So what do? Well, I said we're pretty far behind here. We've got the top decks of the opponent to worry about. If they top deck a burn spell, we're really, really far behind. So I said we have to hope they brick. Therefore, let's play out the Tireless Tracker, which is going to make for a really good turn 4 if it survives, while also walling off the Soulscar Mage and giving us at least the option to trade with Abbot of Carol Keep. So as it happens, this worked out fine for us. I declined, though, to take the trade, and the opponents found another Soulscar Mage. So a good find, but one that does really reward our sequencing. And I think it would have been pretty easy to just play a tap land there and say go. But instead, we took the high upside line. We were rewarded. Now we get to make 2 clues this turn. Start by cracking one of them. Becoming a 4-3 is very relevant against their board, and we'll see what we have found. Well, it's Dark Confidant, but hey, at least this time it's game 1, and I didn't leave him in post-side, right? So I was kind of halfway planning to play Goose here, but the more I thought about it, the more I was like, you know what? I think just becoming 5-4 when the opponent is totally empty-handed is actually going to be really hard for them to beat. And especially when they draw a Mountain, it's going to be even harder for them to handle. So they'll pay the 3 to get Jegantha in their hand this turn, a pretty good use of an otherwise bad turn for the opponent. And we found Tarmogoyf, and now we found Inquisition. Inquisition, of course, not taking Jegantha away anytime soon. So let's just make 2 more clues, make some more basic lands, and we found Scavenging Ooze. So the decent hits keep coming, but Skooz is not the play this turn. It's going to be Goyf and Goose. With that in mind, it's a pretty easy attack for 6 first with the Tracker, because a 5-6 Goyf is going to wall them off very, very well. Goose with a little bit of supplementary life gain. Opponent's going to rip yet another Monastery Swifty. Their threats are wildly outclassed by ours, and that will be the scoop. So, again, M. Hayashi definitely on something unusual. Jegantha's a bit of a strange companion, but, you know, if you're already committed to playing some of these cards, and I remember in 5-0 Dump seeing M. Hayashi play Seal of Fire well before companions were even a thing, right? So if you're already playing a critical mass of cards like this, maybe Jegantha is kind of a free roll. Very interesting deck, but in any case, we do get a nice easy win here in Game 1. We'll see what we can do post-side. Well, my friends, this is becoming a pretty familiar sight. We're depending on an early trophy for removal against a really low curve aggressive deck, and we're also depending on some really painful lands to cast our spells. Perhaps in that way, rather, more than in any other way, we are punished for running against, like, all hyper-aggressive decks with this awesome Field of the Dead brew, because, yes, we have the incidental value in the matchup of Goose, and yes, we are prepared for it in the sideboard with Brutalities, but the land base kind of by definition has to be this way, and this way is very bad against Burn, very much a liability, or Prowess, or unholy Burn Prowess hybrids like the ones we're playing against. So, turn 1 Gilded Goose, pass to the opponent. They let on Soulscar Mage after keeping 7 on the play, and then they will stomp out our poor Goosey and hit us for 2. Back to us, and we're just drawing more kind of clunky stuff. You know, we've drawn Trophy and Tracker, okay, you know, but we're definitely looking a little bit less than optimized, and the Goyf was only going to be a 1-2 there, so the one thing that's great for us is we have 2 Tarmogoyfs, but first we need to do a little bit of trading off first to let the Goyfs grow, right? And also dealing with Soulscar Mage, as I've mentioned repeatedly already, it is going to be a major factor. Now here, unlike in the other round, I did not play around them having light up the stage because, of course, we turn on Spectacle by using the Nurturing Peatland. Given their on-the-play status in the Soulscar Mage, I didn't want to unlock a really crazy turn involving a lot of haste threats, so I thought that was, you know, pretty much an acceptable risk, but as it turns out, we are definitely punished for it, because not only do they get a 1-mana light up the stage, they also get the free land that we give them off of Trophy and cast an otherwise very clunky 3-drop. Like, playing lots of Bone Crusher Giants and Rampaging Ferocidons alongside Light Up the Stage, you're going to have a lot of light-ups that are going to be very unimpressive, especially in the early game. But we are kind enough, of course, to just fully accommodate the opponent here with all of their mana needs. And now, because they already have, enough mana to do whatever they want, this time I just main phase the Trophy and say, no more 1-mana Light Up the Stages for you. So opponent goes Swifty into the Free Burst Lightning, into the Bone Crusher Giant, attacking us here for 2, and we're down to 10, and we are making our land drops, and now it's time to run out 2 Tarmogoyfs. After this much back and forth, they'd usually be 4 and 5, a lot of the time, but there is no land in the graveyard, and that's a big issue, right? So, We could have actually gotten one off of the Verdant Catacombs, but I played out the basic land instead, and we're kind of at the point where we're just hoping that either, to be fair, 3 and 4 versus 4 and 5, is that big of a difference? Well, if we're trying to block Bone Crusher Giant, I guess it is. So I suppose that was actually a misplay, to have run out the basic over the Verdant Catacombs. So yeah, definitely wrong, but doesn't matter. Doesn't matter, because they have Relic, and some very nice sequencing from the opponent there to max the Relic and max the damage and all that stuff. But the point is, they had a really good curve out, and the thing we had going for us is, despite some suboptimal things, at least we can slam a couple Goyfs and hope they're good enough, but not in the face of a Relic and a really wide board, they're not. I definitely was obligated to chump block there, in my view, and then we are kind of rewarded for hanging on to that fetch land, because we get to go Tracker into Double Clue, and gain 1 life off of our food token, right? Because we had to fetch, lose 1 life, tap Peatland, lose 1 life, crack the food, gain 3. So ultimately we only gain 1, but it is enough to extend the game and to represent a trade with a Bone Crusher Giant until the opponent rips Bomat Courier, which is just going to do it. It occurs to me, my friends, that I forgot to mention sideboarding before Game 2 there. Just worth briefly mentioning that Nihil Spellbomb is not good in this matchup, and I was pretty sure about that, although with Hayashi you never know, going into Game 2. But when he shows me Relic for Game 3, it's even clearer, right? So the way we sideboarded for both post-side games is Confidant's out, still leaving in 1 Thoughtseize, it can hit Jegantha. Again, it's kind of a synergy deck over there. You can leverage 1, and when Spellbomb doesn't really do anything besides cantrip and make like our Goyfs and Skoos potentially smaller, I don't really want it, right? So we trim a Wrenn and Six. I'm leaving in all 4 Hour of Promise here. It's definitely a slow card, but is it better than alternatives? Yeah, probably. I at least judged it to be without full knowledge of exactly what the opponent's up to. So we've got the awful turn 1 Effect Shock Thoughtseize play, but it's the only way we can get all of the colors we need to operate. We need black and we need red. What are you going to do? And at least we have Goyf, Brutality, Push, a lot of really good stuff here. And the opponent keeping 7, they have Bomat Courier, Light Up the Stage, Rampaging Ferocidon, Relic of Progenitus. Kind of a weird hand, kind of a strange hand. I think Relic is the clear take there. Relic is going to allow them to beat Tarmogoyf, and Tarmogoyf is the card, as we've seen thus far in this league, that the red decks can often not otherwise beat. Beyond that, Courier can die very easily to what's in our hand, including to a Wrenn and Six ping. So I was like, why don't we see what we're going to draw, and then I'm actually going to consider just pinging with Wrenn here, and that's exactly what we do. So while it could have been still better to play Goyf, I thought it was kind of 6-1, half dozen of the other, and I thought getting a Planeswalker down early is going to give us the most options going into our turn 3. So definitely a bit of an interesting spot. The opponent has no play to make here, so we get to untap with Wrenn, which admittedly is not worth that much in this matchup, but it's still pretty nice. And Goyf comes down, and the opponent will pass. I'm playing out this Bloodstained Mire here because if they play Rampaging Ferocidon, I want to be able to have the option to go fetch Basic Swamp and Fatal Push. And that's exactly what's going to happen here. So So far, so good. Honestly, so far, so good. And Goyf is now 5-6. We've done plenty of trading. And let's make a land drop here. I am kind of abdicating the need to be flush with green for now, and just saving every point of life while I race. Also knowing that I can keep buying back these fetch lands to assemble green as and when I need it. And then it's Collective Brutality escalating once, and we see a hand that at first looks very, very beatable because they have another land they don't need, the Ferocidon, which we can bolt, the Light Up the Stage, which we're about to take, but it's the dang relic. It's the relic. The relic is what we really hate to see there, so what are you going to do? We're still bashing in for 5, and we're still in an okay spot, but the relic is definitely the scary, scary card there. And they rip Soulscar Mage for turn, which is a card that does die to Lightning Bolt, and they do not play the relic. They instead try to go wide this turn, which, you do kind of understand, but at the same time, I think it gives us a real window to draw something awesome here and really capitalize. Really praying for like an Inquisition to take away that relic would just pretty much be GG. Sadly, we draw, wouldn't you guess it, a land. But anyway, we do get another attack in for 5, which I was not expecting to get at all. And now it's time to start going ping mode, going aggro mode with Wrenn and Six, ping the opponent down to 7, and see what we can do. We've still got a lot of time to draw out of this. We are at 15. And the opponent, of course, getting things their own way. Another great draw there would have just been like removal, because that's just going to give us a ton of time here. But their draw for turn was Bone Crusher Giant, which is a disaster. It's a complete disaster. Like, that's arguably one of the scariest draws, because it is basically ensuring Goyf's death in combination with Soulscar Mage. It's got the counters marked on it, and now they can use the relic at their leisure, and Goyf will die to state-based effects. And also, it's a 2-for-1. They've got the 4/3 that taxes removal waiting in the wings. So opponent will sequence with the relic such that we don't even have the Goyf left over. And of course, what did we draw for turn? Just another land. Really frustrating way to be participating, or maybe not participating in the mid-game, as the case may be. And of course, the opponent finds another Monastery Swiftspear, and also the 5th land, so Jegantha is live, and we draw Fatal Push, which is a card. It does a thing, but we are now at the point we're no longer ahead. When we were ahead, drawing 1-for-1s would have been great. Now we're very far behind, so drawing the 1-for-1s is kind of like, keeping us in the game a little bit longer, but we still need a heater off the top. And here I choose to generate Revolt, push the Giant, because we're all in on them bricking, so we gotta hope they're bricking, and if they're bricking, these things are only 1/2s, much less scary than a natural 4 power, but they don't brick, they just keep going wide with a 3/3. We draw Lightning Bolt, same exact take on that as I just gave about Fatal Push. Fine draw when we were ahead, very underwhelming now that we are behind. So here come the beats. Here comes our bolt. Again, same principle. Hit the thing that's naturally bigger. Hope for a brick from the opponent. And to be fair, they do brick with a mountain. But the free 8th card, the free 5/5 will enter their hand. We are on the ropes, my friends. What can we do? Well, Tracker. Tracker off the top is a pretty good draw. Not as good as Scooz. Not as good as potentially Goyf, but maybe he can help find those things, and definitely a fine one. So Tracker into Clue. What's it going to be? Can we find a Goyf? We find Inquisition. Well, we needed you on the turn when they tapped out, declining to play a relic. That's when we needed you. Inquisition, probably the worst draw in our deck right now. You hate to see it. And especially because they also draw another 1-drop that they just play out. So what do we draw? Another Inquisition of Kozilek. Again, really frustrating way to be dropping this game here, and drop it we will, because we don't even have the courtesy of like drawing a land to be able to trade off with Jegantha off of a clue. We just have to chump to stay alive, and the opponent just never fails to draw a creature in this spot. We draw another Tracker, which is far too little, far too late. So honestly, we go 2-2 here in the league against 4 red deck wins. I think that's pretty fair overall. Again, we have structural issues with this deck, specifically with the land base. We are not maximized to beat a deck like this. I hate to complain about stuff like this, but it really does feel like it's been going this way for me lately. When I register Green-Black Rock, I would love nothing more than to play against all red deck wins decks all day. We've got the clean mana, we've got the consistency, we've got the painlessness, and we've got the tools to really compete with those decks very, very well. But instead, when I'm on Rock, we run into like Jund and Bant Snow and decks that I'm just kind of hopeless in the face of their grinding potential most of the time. Then we kind of have the reverse issue here, where I'm playing a deck that can really take any of those decks along and feel favored. I'd feel favored here against Classic Jund with the Field Inevitability. I'd feel favored against Bant Snow with that Inevitability and with all of the hate cards out of the side, but instead, it's all linear decks all the time, so definitely cool to still be having some really good games here, and cool to be holding our own, but man, oh man, I feel like the matchup lottery has been very unkind to us on the channel lately. And honestly, despite that, this game 3 was amazingly winnable. We were very far ahead. They needed to draw a second relic to stay in, and then from there, I think their top decks were just basically very, very good, and ours were about as bad as they can be between the Flood, followed by the Inquisitions, just not where we wanted to be. Again, not really like trying to be Mr. Negative. I do think those things are objectively true. However, if you have a different take, my friends, if you have other opinions, please do let me know. But anyway, some good games. M. Hayashi, always a fun one to play against, and hey, even if we are preferring to draw against other matchups for the sake of maximizing our deck, I personally always love playing against any red deck wins variant in Modern. So good games, well played. Well, it is round 5, my friends, and we have a reasonable hand, just on the strength, potentially in a blind, game 1 of Inquisition and or Lightning Bolt. You've got to figure if one isn't live, at least the other one definitely will be. So between being on the draw, which makes us more likely to hit the land drops and or the Wrenn and Six we need to curve out with this hand, I think it is a keep. But as always, we do have some pain in our land base. At least this time we're not against a red deck wins deck. We're in round 5 and we do hit a different archetype, but it's still a hyper-aggressive one, and with a hyper-aggressive start, Stitcher Supplier turn 1 off of a keep of 7, milling over Scab Ruinator, which is not one you always see, and Vengevine. So, back to us, hey, drawing another land is okay, and we will definitely take this chance to Inquisition, because Lightning Bolt's not doing much for us, and there are some enablers like Hedron Crab we could potentially hit, but we just see Narcomoeba Prized Amalgam, and as our only 2 takes. Gotta take the Narcomoeba there, because Amalgam's going to do more harm than good in the graveyard on average, but we've got bigger problems, and those problems are in the form of that Gurmag Angler that's in hand. Now, I haven't played against Crabvine in a while, but the last I knew, Angler was not stock, but certainly turn 2 Angler on the play, plus everything else that's going on, not very good. Makes our Lightning Bolt look pretty bad. You know, we've been casting trophies against 1-drops all league like a bunch of dummies, but now that we really need a trophy, it's nowhere to be found. So we're just getting smacked by Angler, and they hardcast that Amalgam, right? And then it is back to us. We are hitting the land drops, to be fair, that we need to stay in the game, but this is just not a matchup where our stuff lines up. You know, we need to draw Scavenging Ooze and Tarmogoyf, and even Goyf at this point wouldn't really be where we wanted to be, so instead we just run out Tracker. They hardcast that Vengevine, trade it off, and then we finally do draw our trophy, so that's something, but we're very, very dead. We can trophy the Angler and bolt the Supplier, and that's great, but then we just die to the Amalgam. So an ignominious defeat game 1, and definitely not really doing us any favors with like drawing Trackers and Hours of Promise and then running into a really fast, really recursive Crabvine deck that had a really fast and recursive progression. But to be fair, a lot of game 1s with BGX will go very similarly, even if it was stock Jund, for example, against that progression. So again, kind of have to try to, you know, have them experience some kind of a fail rate and or draw a Scooze or a critical mass of Goyfs. We didn't have it, we just got run over. Alright, guys, so Brutality, only one Brutality comes in, 2 Nihil Spellbomb is our best card. I brought in both Plague Engineer, but I don't know how exactly to rate it relative to the Angler build. In one way, it seems like Plague Man's static effect is less useful when they do have Angler baked into the cake, but on the other hand, just having a Death Touch to trade off with Angler is pretty good too, right? So I said, well, call it a wash, bring in the Plague Man, and ultimately, again, we're in a spot where our main deck has definitely got a lot of things that are very cuttable in a matchup like this, so I ended up opting for 2 Wrenn and Six, and then I trimmed around the edges, losing 1 Tracker, 1 Hour of Promise, and 1 Abrupt Decay. You could make the case for a couple different things, like Decay staying in to hit Hedron Crab, I guess is okay, but we've got a lot of things that do that. So again, trimming around the edges, cutting away Abrupt Decay, and of course leaving in trophies once more out of respect for Angler. That opening hand was very tempting to keep because I rate discard pretty highly in this matchup, but especially on the play, but it was again a mana issue operating off a colorless and a black, not really going to do it, so I do have to mulligan, and then unfortunately we mulligan down to a pretty bad one-lander. It can Thoughtseize, it can cast the lightning bolts, it doesn't really do anything else. I felt obligated here to go down again, and then we have a very keepable 5. We just definitely bottom that Hour of Promise, and I also choose to bottom Plague Man here, and we just operate off double Nihil Spellbomb, double land, and a Dark Confidant, and I think that is correct. And I am optimistic enough here to fetch and shock, trying to get my green online for Skoos. Also wanting to be able to cast Wrenn and Six at some point if I draw it, just to make land drops. And, pinging can be relevant in the matchup, so even though our life total's still definitely not free, that's what we do. Opponent once again keeping a 7 with a turn 1 supplier. It mills over a bunch of lands and a Narcomoeba, and I decide I cannot afford to compete over that, so very bad draw of a 5-drop Hour of Promise here, and then a very interesting spot. So I think the more obvious thing to do is to play the other Spellbomb and then have the existing Spellbomb able to be activated, and then from there you would probably hold it up, right? And reason that if they're going to cast an Angler, they have to take some action at some point that you can consider responding to, and that was my first thought, but I said, you know what, I feel pretty behind, I'm going to play for the higher upside. I'm going to stick a Bob, it's more mana efficient, it can have a majorly high upside if he sticks, and even if they price us into cracking the Spellbomb without getting to cash it in for the cantrip, well, if they do that, Bob's gonna most likely live, and then we're making up for the lost card anyway, admittedly, in a more potentially painful way. So that was my reasoning there. I kind of like the reasoning, and the opponent is on a one-lander. They go Hedron Crab and then pass, so far so good, feeling very rewarded for that decision, but the problem is we are already down to 11 after having fetched, and it's not exactly easy to see us winning through even some very mediocre beats from the opponent, unless, as always, this is the refrain from this league, we draw cards like Skoos and Tarmogoyf. So, Inquisition will see Hedron Crab number 2 and a Glimpse the Unthinkable. They also have Creeping Chill, Vengevine, and double Angler in hand, so the Anglers are what's really a little bit scary here. Fortunately, we do have Spellbombs to compete over them. So once again, I take away the Crab, take away the creature, playing for the high upside, of course, of them never having a second land and not really being able to do much. So, Bob will race because I'm not blocking the supplier anytime soon, and the opponent recognizes that as well, so they actually hang back with the supplier. So in that way, being aggressive with Bob actually ended up saving us life too. So they just chip back with the Narcomoeba, and then they pass, having missed the second land drop. So that's pretty good. And I decide that with this Hour of Promise in hand, and with Bob seeing more cards, I want to be proactive in the sense of using the Nihil Spellbomb right there, especially because we know it is still keeping them off of Angler really well. And, we're taking a little bit too much pain to be comfortable off of our Bob. He flipped for 1 and then he flipped for 2. There's some decent finds, but we would prefer these to be painless. That said, Lightning Bolt the Crab right before they make their second land drop, and then play a Tarmogoyf. That is some pretty decent stuff, but what we haven't really done is made our other land drop. Then we have another very interesting decision. So again, we're drawing kind of the wrong half of the meta for our deck to shine, but I love these matchups because they don't go on forever, and they have some super interesting decision points. This is one of them. It's like, okay, Assassin's Trophy on the Spellbomb. If we cash it in response, then we're getting 2 cards out of their graveyard, which, make no mistake, is relevant. But honestly, I rated hitting the 4th land drop more highly. And that is something that at the end, I deliberated back and forth, and then I decided, you know what, I think the 4th land drop is definitely correct here. But I kind of forgot that I could get the triggered ability here. I rather forgot that I could capitalize on the triggered ability here. So I was like, let's get another green for Scooz. Should have gotten, remember we have a snow-covered swamp in the deck, probably should have gotten that for the cash-in, right? Bob flipping painlessly, though, with Field of the Dead feels good. And we'll play Wrenn and Six. We unfortunately don't have all that much to do this turn, but Wrenn and Six pinging the Narcomoeba is going to extend the game nicely, and I'm pretty happy to maintain a defensive posture because we have Hour of Promise's inevitability. So if we just, don't lose from here, we're in a really good spot. However, the opponent has a really nutty turn because not only do they hit the 3rd land, allowing them to glimpse themselves and then follow up with an Angler, they also hit Narcomoeba and double Creeping Chill off of it. And remember, this isn't Dredge where they have a million such really good kind of on impact hits, if you will. So that was an unusually brutal Glimpse the Unthinkable, right? And definitely pretty rough, but I don't really regret any of our sequencing. I don't really regret sitting back. They're already at 18. I think starting to attack with Goyf is loose, right? So this is just kind of the hand that was dealt us. So we got to hope for some good flips with Bob. But we are down to 2. Thankfully, though, Bob does flip painlessly. So we ping away the Narcomoeba. We've drawn Tarmogoyf, and basic land, of course, was the flip off of Bob. And then we get a really nice Hour of Promise here. We've already got Field of the Dead down, so we just get a couple different named lands, including Bojuka Bog, exiling the rest of their graveyard, which is really nice, making more zombies, and still feeling priced into sitting back. I'm basically hoping to be able to deal on my own terms at some point with the Angler, and certainly cannot attack into it with a 4/5 Goyf. So the opponent plays another Narcomoeba. Once again, we're at the total mercy of Bob, and finally Bob lets us down with a flip of Plague Engineer. But frankly, Bob was really good that game. Bob was not why we lost. Bob was why we had a chance after mulling to 5 against a really resilient progression. It was not as explosive. They were stuck on a land. They didn't find the second land until after we had already dealt with both Hedron crabs. We had a lot of things going for us, but the card Stitcher Supplier is really hard sometimes for BGX decks to beat, because we kind of, it fills up the graveyard, it chips in for a little bit of damage, and then it puts us into a standoff. And when they have a hand like that, it can play to their advantage, and in this case, it absolutely did. So, for a mull to 5, we put up a pretty good fight, and we definitely had some things go our way, definitely had some things not so much go our way. We did have Field of the Dead online. We had some good stuff coming down. We had a lot to like. Unfortunately, the life total, as always, was just a little bit too much of a liability for us. So, like I said at the beginning, if you watched the intro, 5 hyper aggro matchups, and very, very binary in that way, especially relative to what our deck is designed to do. So one reason I wanted to repurpose the content into a replay is to show you part of what the deck was designed to do, which is play against a deck like Bant Snow. So we're going to show you a bonus round right now from my warm-up games in the tournament practice lobby against Bant Snow. Alright, bonus round. So in the blind, this is a totally fine keep, but of course, as I've already said, we're against Bant, and Yeah, it's nice to have the option to either Inquisition or Goose turn 1, but I think most of the time you're going to want to Inquisition, right? And that's what we do here. The opponent has led on Snow Island into Astrolabe, and we see a really scary Bant progression. They've got Force of Negation to protect the payoffs of Uro, Jace, Cryptic Command. They've got 3 lands that will surely hit the 4th. So what do we do? Well, taking Force was actually my first thought, because I was like, okay, I want to be able to try to trophy the Jace if they play him out early. But Uro is actually, this is a rare occasion where we can deal with Uro at parity if we Inquisition him and then follow up with Goose into Bojuka Bog next turn. So that is my plan. It does definitely leave us a little bit potentially soft to Jace, but hopefully we'll draw a threat. And look at that, we have a tracker off the top. So the plan, my friends, is coming together. We're going to lead on Gilded Goose. We're going to Bojuka Bog away the Uro and the whatever else was in there, fetch land, right? Something like that. And now we have the ability to go turn 3 tracker into land, which is really, really nice. And as far as we know, they do not have a way to stop it. They only have 2 unknowns in hand. Definitely worth using this food to try for it, especially because we just drew Wooded Foothills, and that's going to make for 2 clues. Unfortunately, opponent has drawn Mana Leak, so bad feels bad. And Mana Leak was pretty much their perfect card there. So the beats continue. Not only did they find Mana Leak, they did find the 4th land. They get to run out the Jace. We are in some trouble, my friends. So end step fetch. Untap, see what we can do. Maybe looking for discard to clear the way for trophy. We don't have it. I rated trophy here worth doing just because they might need to cash in something good to the Force to protect the Jace, and indeed, it is a Cryptic Command that they pitched, so that in itself is a win, but we are still in a whole lot of trouble here. Because an uncontested Jace is going to bury just about any mid-range deck that exists. We had some good draws. Again, discard would have been nice to clear the way there. Lightning Bolt is a follow-up to the forced trophy, things like that, but it didn't work out for us, so opponent just brainstorming. We'll cycle away a land, and Hour of Promise is a find along with a bunch of lands. So all we can really do is try to Windmill Slam these Hours. We don't know any card in their hand, just hoping they haven't drawn Permission, but of course they have another Cryptic, and that's just going to be enough for me. I scooped to that. Technically, we could play it out. Of course, you can always play it out against control, but the opponent just has 2-for-1'd us far too many times. They're going to have 5, maybe 6 cards in hand when they untap, and we're just trying to resolve a 5-mana sorcery against Jace. It's just not going to happen. So that was a pretty tough game 1, guys, make no mistake. But you know what? If they hadn't drawn that Mana Leak, if our tracker had resolved, I think it would have been incredibly different. We would have been able to pressure the Jace. They would not have the luxury to sequence the way they did. We would have made at least a couple clues off of it, if not more. Would have been very, very different. So I just want to impress that upon you. But nevertheless, they had the answers. We got completely crushed because they did. So some very heavy sideboarding I've partaken in here against Bant Snow. We brought in 3 Boils. All 3 Boils. Feels great. 2 copies of Veil of Summer. 2 copies of Nihil Spellbomb. Definitely warranted against Uro. And I'm sure many other things they could be using, including Mystic Sanctuary, Snapcaster Mage, you know the drill. And 2, but not the full 3, Collective Brutality. I think usually 1 to 2, more likely 2 is the sweet spot for Brutality against these blue decks these days. It's just nice to have that critical mass of discard against Cryptic Command, Force of Negation, so forth. The other modes are live sometimes too, but too many Brutalities is very bad, embarrassingly bad, in fact, against Planeswalkers, so you've got to find the happy medium there. In order to accommodate all of these cards, we've sideboarded heavily. Pushes go out. I chose to side out Gilded Geese because they can't pressure, especially can't pressure Planeswalkers, so even though they're recursive value, I don't think their value is worth much here. Again, things like ramping a tracker out under a discard spell are interesting, but ultimately I moved away from them, and I also, as you can see, moved away from Tarmogoyfs. We've got to have more things that get more value if we're committing this heavily to disruption, which we are. Now, another awkward opening hand. Again, I'm not trying to have a negativity bias here, but we've had, against all the aggressive decks, we've had all of the painful lands, right? Now here we have all the basic lands, which is actively bad against the Field of Ruin, Path to Exile deck, and on top of that, the basics don't even cast our green spells. Nevertheless, I hate to mulligan in this matchup. We can possibly fix our mono with Field of Ruin. We can at least hope to draw more lands and at least cast Decay until then. So that's kind of where I'm hanging my hat. But I can't help but feel that we haven't really seen the full potential of the deck despite a few rounds here. 6 rounds to be exact. But we'll see what we can do here. Now, Collective Brutality T2, we see a bunch of lands, Aquatl, Cryptic Command, and Veil of Summer. So I feel obligated to take the Veil. Technically, right now, do we necessarily need to? No, but there is just no way that Veil doesn't become a blowout as the game goes on, right? So, opponent with the Misty. We draw Wrenn and Six, feels so bad because it's so good and we can't cast it. And the opponent, I think, here makes a bit of a misplay. Like, I think, it's very easy for me to say because I know exactly what my deck in my hand is, and the opponent does not. So this is not really a criticism, but I think it's pretty obvious that we're hurting for land. So I fully expected them to just go get a basic island there, operate off the Astrolabe, and leave us stranded without green mana, without a Field of Ruin target. But instead, they will play out the... they will go get a Breeding Pool, use it for Quattle, untap, find another Astrolabe, play another land. Lots of good stuff, lots of typical Bant snow things, but the crucial factor is we get to make Field of Ruin useful, we get to go get a forest. Back to us, and we draw Nurturing Peatland. Very nice draw, because any kind of a dual land is great right now. Peatland has good synergy with Wrenn, and Peatland allows us to protect it from permission with Veil of Summer. Turns out we didn't need it. So it was interesting there to ping or to buy back the field. I actually chose to ping, but I could really see an argument for either one. And on the end step, opponent will go for an Abrupt Decay on a Wrenn and Six, and here's where it feels great to be the one with Veil of Summer. So Wrenn is already a really nice big X for 1 in our favor, with having pinged the opponent's creature, having drawn out a Decay that we get to Veil. Opponent will Mystic Sanctuary to buy back Abrupt Decay, I believe is what just happened, and then draw, they drew it off Astrolabe, and then they used it on Wrenn. So they do finally get our Wrenn off the field, but thankfully we rip the 5th land, which is exactly what we needed, and they have, I guess, 2 unknowns in hand, so they could have Force of Negation here, but you think they would have forced a Veil, right, or something? Maybe forced the Wrenn, I don't know. They probably would have used Force by now, is what I'm trying to say. So they don't have it, and we get to resolve the big Haymaker, Hour of Promise. Field of the Dead making 2 zombies, Bojuka Bog exiling their yard. Feels great. However, it's not that big of a Haymaker as it would be in many cases, simply because we knew that they had this Field of Ruin. So they get to field our field away. However, we've still come out majorly ahead on that exchange. And then I actually had an interesting decision here. So if we were sure that Hour of Promise would resolve, the thing to do here would be to hold the Wooded Foothills, because we're going to go get a Field of the Dead off this. Wooded Foothills itself coming down would make a zombie, and then we'd go fetch another one. But I was worried about Mono Leak, and I'm like, okay, if Hour of Promise resolves, I think I'm cool taking 1 less zombie off of it. Just to play around Mono Leak, but definitely a judgment call, definitely the safer but lower upside play that you could go either way with. But hey, maybe we did play around the Mono Leak. Either way, it resolves. We get a couple more zombies. We thin out the deck very aggressively. We then fetch off Foothills, make yet another zombie. We're doing it, guys. We're doing the Field of the Dead thing, and really getting a ton of X for 1 value against this controller player. Against this opponent here. And opponent, unfortunately, rips another Field of Ruin, so down go our Fields of the Dead. That we only have 2 in the deck, that's it, but, Wrenn and Sixes can maybe buy them back, but for now, we'll have to make do with 5 zombies, and that's about all we have got. However, that is enough for exactly lethal. We know they've got Cryptic, so it's not going to be lethal this turn, unless we force the issue somehow, but we're in a pretty good spot. So we draw Thoughtseize off Peatland, we draw another Thoughtseize for turn. So I like just moving to attacks here, forcing them to Cryptic the team down to stay alive. And that's what happens. So that's cool. Definitely what the opponent needed to do there, but now we get to follow up with a Thoughtseize. At least one, possibly two, and we see another Cryptic command. Well, that's obviously the one to take. And then we have a really interesting call. We're clearly going to Thoughtseize a second time, and we can take either Fatal Push or Cling to Dust. So Fatal Push is what directly keeps them alive. By just simply pushing a zombie, they only take 8 instead of 10. Cling to Dust, my first thought was, well, let's take Cling to Dust because they can just gain the life off of a creature card. But you look a little bit more closely, there's no creature cards in the graveyard. So then my second thought was, well, let's take Fatal Push and try to achieve lethal. But Cling to Dust is a draw. Even though it won't gain them the life, it will exile something else and it will draw them a card. And I thought, against Bant Snow, the draw is a lot scarier than them Fatal Pushing one of my 5 zombie tokens. So, like, if I felt really behind, maybe, like, if I had nothing in hand, then maybe I say, okay, let's just take the push and pray they draw bricks for turn and off of the 2 Cling to Dust draws. But instead I said, no, let's be a little bit more patient. Let's play a little bit more for the long game, and let's see what they've got. So to that end, we do take Cling. They're going to push a zombie, sure. You know, we still put them to 2. It's still pretty good, right? It's still a very good value to force them to use a spell for that. I did have a consideration not to play Bob just because a sweeper would really suck, but you know what else would really suck is them just kind of 1-for-1ing and 2-for-1ing their way out of it. So I did decide to play the Bob out and risk getting blown out by a sweeper. The opponent will buy back Cryptic Command with a Mystic Sanctuary. You really do hate to see that. And I think the only card in their hand is Unknown at this point. And then on our end step, they will... Yes, they will Cling to Dust, exiling one of our Fields of the Dead to draw a card. Okay, so opponent really rebuilding here. They find another Field of Ruin, 2 unknowns in hand, and then they're going to push Bob. Okay, good enough for me. You know, definitely sucks, but let's see if our zombies can get there. We know they won't this turn because we know their last card in hand is Cryptic. And sure enough, they go for the Cryptic, but they just go Cryptic to tap down and draw. I was expecting them to bounce Mystic Sanctuary, which may or may not have been the best play in a vacuum, but I was fully prepared to trophy the Mystic in response. And if the opponent read us for that, then that is some very high-level anticipatory play. However, we draw a brick off the top, so that feels bad. However, it feels good to see the concession because I guess the opponent's 2 cards were not enough to continue some kind of a Cryptic loop or to otherwise stave off the Field of the Dead Horde. So that was a pretty cool win, just in that we are getting a lot of value and advantage off of Hour of Promise and Field of the Dead and able to fair and square without needing to like cheese them out with a boil or something, outgrind a Bant Snow deck that had a pretty darn good progression. So this is again what Alan's list is designed to do, and do it we did. But Game 3, we're going to be on the draw. Let's see if we can replicate this feat. Well, as mentioned, we're on the draw, and it's also a no-lander, so as tasty as these boils and the Hour of Promise and the Wrenn and Six and the Tracker, it's a lot of good grindy cards. As tasty as all that looks, we can't keep it. So we mulligan to a very, very mediocre 6. Skoos and Trophy are both pretty medium compared to a lot of cards that are left in our deck in most ways, and the opponent keeping 7 on the draw, I'm not very optimistic, but you know what, we will just have to see how it goes. Opponent leading on Spellbomb saying go. We've drawn Dark Confidant. That seems like an actually really good draw, so they could have Mana Leak. As always, we would hate for that to happen, but if they don't, then maybe, just maybe, Bob can unmulligan us. That is the idea here. A mountain off the top is pretty awful, you have to say. The flood issues persist in the lobby as they do in the leagues, but the opponent will flash in Quattle, untap, attack, make a land drop, And then it is Dead of Winter time. I'm sorry, I've been calling this Bant Snow, but this is Sultai. This is Sultai Snow, Sultai Control. And Dead of Winter is obvious proof of that, if the Abrupt Decay wasn't enough, right? So, I guess technically these could be 4-color piles, even if you see a black spell, but you understand the point here. So we've drawn Collective Brutality, and I think now is a great time to escalate. Against Force of Negation, it is always worth just like giving it that extra second thought, do we really want to escalate? But in the context of our hand, with some throwaway lands to throw away, I do like Brutality to kill the snake and to check the hand, and we get Archmage's Charm out of the hand, so that's pretty good. And the opponent's still got plenty of stuff to do, but it's nothing overtly terrifying. It's not like we're staring down like a Jace and a Force of Negation to protect him or something like that, right? So let's just hope for the best and hope for some good draws off the top. Opponent will play Astrolabe and then play a land we did not know about. So only one unknown in the OP's hand. And it is time to grab our missing shock land, untap, and draw a boil. We draw a boil. That's what we like to see, my friends. That is it. So we're going to bide our time and wait for a good window and kind of let the opponent make the first move here. I don't play Ooze, partially because we just really want to use Boil to win, but partially because, you know, there's a Spellbomb on the opposing side. It's not like Skooz is amazing right now anyway. So opponent's going to go for the Spellbomb cantrip. Then they're going to fetch and shock, and then they're going to say go. And I hesitated, once again thinking about Mana Leak, but then I said, you know what, let's go for it. We're going to get a triple Stone Rain if it resolves. And will it resolve? They're going to pay costs. It's another Quattle, okay? Looking for Force of Negation, they don't hit it. So we get the nice 3-for-1 in our favor. We force them to play out a Sanctuary tapped to start trying to rebuild their land base, and, you know, they've still got a full half of a grip. They've got 4 cards in hand. We draw another Boil, so tempting though it is to just use it as another Stone Rain, I think we can try to find a higher upside than that, and try to get a little bit more proactive now by playing out the Skooz. So that's what we do. The opponent is making land drops that we knew about. In this case, that would be Field of Ruin. And then they're going to pass, decline to attack, second main, play out an Uro. And Uro is our enemy. Uro, we hate to see him, and he's going to ramp the opponent. They're finding a lot of land drops that they need, and awkwardly, it's not a good time for Boil, because only one of them is an island. But the good news is, we are really rewarded for going on the Skooz plan, because we get to eat the Uro. We get to eat the Quattle, and the downside of the opponent's land base is that, although it plays around Boil, it does not grant the Quattle Death Touch. There are not enough snow permanents on the field, and then it's Inquisition time, and we see an interesting 5-drop Ashiok Nightmare Muse. This card has kind of quietly started to see some level of play, usually is a grindy one of in some Sultai variants in Modern, and we see the third Quattle of the game and the second Uro of the game. So if we didn't have the right disruption at the right times, we'd be in some trouble. But we do decide to take away the Quattle there. Uro, again, something that we can eat after they cast it out of the graveyard. That's the idea. So taking away Quattle is going to stop them from having a critical mass of snow creatures. It's going to stop them from developing a board presence that can compete with ours. And it's also giving the Skooz something to eat, so we can aggressively start clocking. Opponent's going to start off their turn by fielding us. We'll keep working on their graveyard in response. I do decide to get a second black mana just in case we need to double spell, basically. They'll follow up with an Astrolabe, and now Death Touch is online. So end step will eat that Dead of Winter. Untap, and we draw Field of Ruin. So let's go for it. We're going to go for the Boil. We're going to see if we can boil them out again. And we do. No Force of Negation this time. So that was amazing. A double Stone Rain, which is very brutal on the back of the first triple Stone Rain. And once again, it allows us to take Death Touch away crucially from Icefang Quattle, allowing the Ooze to continue clocking, which is really what we want to be doing here, and that's just enough for the opponent. They take their draw step, maybe they are finally stranded without sufficient mana. I'm not certain, but either way, the double boil is good enough to do it. So we beat them in Game 2 off of the back of Field of the Dead and Hour of Promise, and then we beat them here in Game 3 off of the Jund Disruption, discard spells. We had removal in the back pocket in the form of trophy, didn't really choose to use it, but the Scoo's Disruption was really, really relevant here, and then of course Boil was the big haymaker. Okay, friends, so some interesting gameplay here, and another kind of mediocre result, frankly. I am on my run of worst ever results since I started playing Modern, and it's a small sample size these days with me. I'm playing like 1 or 1.5 leagues per week right now, I guess, but I am below average. I am hitting more 2-3s than 3-2s, and that has literally never been the case for me before. From the time I started off with Rock, playing competitive leagues back when competitive and friendly was a distinction, I was at least averaging 3-2, and in many cases I've had like a very extended 75, even 80% win rate in leagues. Lately I've been struggling a lot more, and I think part of it is to do with the meta, but also part of it is just to do with variance, and I am playing a wide variety of decks, some of which are not necessarily the very most optimized versions. It's not like I'm playing only sticking to one archetype and making it as competitive as possible with no other experimentation involved every time. And as always, guys, I am not flawless, far, far from it. I know I made a few misplays here. I don't believe, though, any of them cost us any games, but maybe I'm wrong. As always, you'll let me know in the comments below if I failed to see, rather, a missed opportunity to capitalize on what the fates gave us. But the interesting thing here is just how well Field of the Dead performed, even though we were in very suboptimal circumstances. Now, some of this is kind of subjective and feelings-based, but the same notion that I have when I'm facing down a Field of the Dead of just like dreaded inevitability from the opponent, when I'm not far enough ahead and they start getting the field online and it's like, oh geez, okay, well I basically can't win from here unless the stars really align. I did have that feeling using field, and I don't think the design of this card is very good. I kind of hate it, but it was cool to be on the using end of this inevitability for once, and I do think it's very much worth considering how many natural synergies Jund does have with the idea of ramping to Field of the Dead and Hour of Promise. Like, there are a lot of built-in synergies, we don't have to accommodate it that much, and it is a very powerful tool. And I just showed you that lobby match at the end. I went 3-0 in the lobby against Bant or Sultai Snow decks. Pretty easy wins. I showed you the closest and most interesting of the 3 matches. Like, seems like if that's the deck to beat, then this is a really viable deck to play. But unfortunately, as you saw in our actual league, we played against 5 of 5 hyper aggro matchups. I don't know what I've got to do to buy favorable matchups for a full league, or at least more favorable than unfavorable relative to what I'm playing. I guess I've just got to keep going, and eventually those pieces of variance will break our way. But Alan, my friend, I hope you enjoyed the content. I hope you enjoyed the bonus round. I did do some extra legwork to bring that to you and to the community, just because I wanted to give your deck its fair due and show exactly what it was designed to do, how we can execute that on a really consistent basis. So as always, my friends, if you have any suggestions on the list, I'm sure Alan would love to hear them. And I'm sure the rest of the viewership would love to hear them as well. If you guys have messed around with Field of the Dead before, please do let us know in the comments what you think about it. And yeah, otherwise, I don't know, Modern is still kind of meh for me, but I have to say that, again, if I was on a more normal BGX deck, I would be thrilled to not be playing against Bant Snow in big mana all the time, It was kind of a cool refresher, even though it did not favor our particular build, to run into all of those, like, good, honest aggro decks, right? So anyway, pros and cons is always a kind of mixed bag with Modern, and yeah, that's kind of where it's been at for me lately. So thank you so much for watching. I hope you enjoyed this one. I don't know exactly what we're doing next on the channel, but as always, please do Give a thumbs up if you liked it, hit subscribe so you don't miss the next one, and I hope to see you for whatever we do next. Thank you once again to Alan Lambert, wonderful Of the Veil tier Patreon supporter. I don't know if I mentioned this, but he let me borrow some of these cards as well as generously funding the donation league. So great guy as always. Thanks to all other Patreon supporters, and thank you so much for watching. Everybody out there, have a wonderful day, and I will talk to you soon.